Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition, in fact, the October/Halloween edition of GMAT Club's GMAT Debriefs. Yay! And yeah, actually, before we start, some of you saw me put this on probably when we went live stream. The goal was to have this on beforehand and start off with it. You know how ridiculous this thing is? First off, the band, it doesn't work. You need a watermelon-sized head to fit into this thing. So that was the first issue with this Halloween edition. By the way, pumpkins in the background for those who celebrate. The second issue is this thing is harder to breathe in than a coronavirus mask. It doesn't work. No wonder these guys don't. No wonder these guys don't hit their targets. They're trying to breathe. Like, hey, should we hit that target? No. I'm trying to breathe right now, man. And no wonder Vader was pissed off. With Vader, he really couldn't breathe. That's why he's choking people all the time. So, make a long story short, was going to use a Vader voice changer. That didn't work. Was going to use this. This didn't work. So, we're going to go with the scariest thing I could find, which was my face. Now, on to business. Today, we have an ex-moderator. He scored a 730 on the GMAT, which is an incredible score. For those of you who saw my debrief last time, we had Lynn, who scored a 720. Great score as well. Mike one-upped her a little bit, which is why we have him on this morning. So, Mike, without further ado, you're a good friend. You're a wonderful friend. This is the first time I've ever seen your face. That's how good a friend you are, and that's how well I know you. So please introduce yourself and welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to be here and share my experience. So just a little bit about me. I went to a small university, got a degree in marketing. And then long story short, after several role changes and relocations and things like that, currently working for a tech company as a sales engineer.
Awesome. That sounds like a great background that business schools are going to absolutely love and adore. Not to mention that fantastic GMAT score you have. For those of you in the audience, I see we have 32 people already, so that's awesome. If throughout the live stream you want me to give you a shout out because I know you, for example, you go in the general chat quite often, put your name in the chat and I'll make sure to call you out at some point. Before we also kick off, I want to share one really quick thing with all of you. Whoop. That work? Make sure to go to, there we go. Second time's a charm. Please make sure to sign up for our MBA regional fair. It's a good time. You get a lot of exposure to a couple of really great schools, Tuck among them, which is an Ivy League. So please do your best to sign up and attend. Business schools like to see you go the extra mile and make that effort. So with that said, Mike, are you ready for all these wonderful questions?
Let's do it.
Awesome. And I'm sorry, one last thing. Wow, so unprepared. For everybody in chat, if you post a question, I will get to it at the end if I don't hit on it throughout the actual conversation with Mr. Scarn. So please be aware of that. If you post a question and I don't get to it immediately, we are going to get to it. I promise, and it will be answered. At GMAT Club, we want to make sure that you have all the information you need and want. So, Mike, you've introduced yourself. I've introduced myself. So what made you decide to take the GMAT? And subsequently, what was the very first thing you decided to do after deciding to take the GMAT? Was it going to GMAT Club and signing up for our wonderful forum? Was it looking at courses? Was it thinking to yourself, I don't know what I'm getting myself into and I need to see a therapist? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So as I was finishing undergrad, I kind of knew, I went to a small school and I kind of knew I maybe wanted to go to grad school afterwards at some point. And so I learned that based on my career goals and things like that, an MBA would probably be the best fit. And so did some research, learned about the GMAT, and then really shortly after graduating from undergrad, about 3 years ago, sadly, I started looking into the GMAT, and so didn't really know where I was going. Didn't have any friends or much of my network had gone to business school or anything like that. So really started from scratch just with Google searches, and started off by just getting the official guides of that year, I think 2017 or 2018. And then just started kind of blindly working through those at the very beginning, which then led me to, missing a question, not understanding why, Google searching it, which then led me to GMAT Club, where I would see lots of great solutions and discussions around different questions. And, so then there were lots of other kind of routes that I went down. Yeah, that's maybe the first start to it.
Awesome. Now, what was your timetable like? So, and by the way, by amazing coincidence, my finding my way to GMAT Club was very similar to yours. So I think it's a lot of our students got here. What was your timetable like, and what were the goals you put in place for yourself? Were you hoping to get a 700 within 3 months? Were you hoping for a 750 in a year? Or were you hoping more for maybe a 650 after a month or two of studying? Take us through your mindset.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And ultimately, I think my story is not the ideal scenario. I think that on the forum, and maybe we can link to it in the description or something, BB wrote up a great post on how to study for the GMAT. And I really think that it's perfect. I think ideally you spend about 3, maybe 4 months, because you do start to lose your skills and things like that faster than you can retain them, I guess, which I definitely experienced. But to answer your question, I kind of knew that with my background, I was starting from zero on quant, for example. There are many different subjects that I had no knowledge of, combinations and permutations. I mean, I went to Khan Academy and just had to learn those from scratch. So I knew that for me, it would probably take longer, and it certainly did. But I just kind of took the mindset of, I'm going to piecemeal this out and segment out everything, and learn it one step at a time and not be discouraged. So I didn't have a goal right out of the gate of, oh, I want to get a 730 or whatever. I was originally just kind of trying to do my best on the GMAT. And then as time went on, started to get a better idea of, what scores were competitive, what was, what kind of score I could hope to attain and things like that. But I really, again, I think a lot of it was due to me not wanting to be discouraged or anything like that. I just decided to really piecemeal it out and study one subject at a time with kind of the mindset of, okay, I'm going to master probability, and then I'm going to master combinations, and just one by one, all the different quant subjects. So that's maybe a long-winded answer. But yeah, that's kind of how it went. And so, eventually, I got to the point where I studied for a long time, right? And I never thought it would take 3 years to get my score, but I do remember kind of having this aha moment after several times of reading debriefs on GMAT Club of other folks that kind of had similar backgrounds to me, or kind of started with pretty low scores, and things like that, and seeing how they had attained great scores. And so that it kind of clicked for me that a great GMAT score isn't necessarily, you're not going to necessarily naturally have that, but you can attain it, and the test is something you can train for and really master the test itself. So that was really encouraging for me, because I've always been kind of a hard worker, and so I just took the mindset of, I'm going to just work really hard. If it takes me twice as long as the average person, I don't care. I'll do it anyway. And so, I kind of had the mindset of, I'll take as long as it takes to get, my goal. And eventually I ended up, having a goal of getting into the 700 club. And then I kind of adjusted that and thought, well, because 3 years ago, kind of 700 was like a 720. So 720 is the new 700. Some say. So I decided, okay, I want to get a 720 or above. And so that's what I ended up getting, thankfully, luckily.
That's awesome. So again, a very long way of saying, yes, you met your goal. No, you didn't meet your timetable necessarily, but after 3 years, you got to where you needed to be.
Yeah, and I didn't. So the answer is I didn't set a timetable because I knew that if I had just said, okay, I'm going to do this for 4 months, and then whatever I get, I wouldn't necessarily be happy there. But I just decided that I was going to do whatever it took for as long as it took to achieve my target score.
Awesome. And that's exactly what we want to hear on the, at least in this chat on GMAT Club, especially when we have students, some of whom post debriefs. They say, you know what, I got a 720, a 740, a 760 in 3 months.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly demotivating and demoralizing to a lot of our students, you and me among them. I mean, I was not at 700 in 3 months. I can tell you that. And I think the vast majority aren't. So to have someone like you, and again, Lynn, last time we did this, to have that grounding effect to say, you know what, you can get there even if you're not a super genius. I think that helps a lot of our users. So I appreciate that. So sort of moving into the more tangible, how were you studying consistently and working? I know you mentioned you graduated. It's been 3 years, unfortunately. Um, I asked Lynn this, and I have to ask this similar to you. I mean, were you under your desk with a flashlight studying? Were you in the break room during your lunch breaks? Were you a morning person or a night person and doing that grind? What was that like to make sure that you were getting the studying time that you needed while also balancing your real life?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, the GMAT and studying for the GMAT turned me into a morning person. I was, yeah. So 3 years ago, I was never a morning person at all. But I found that, if I was studying after work, like when I initially started studying the GMAT after work, my brain just was, tired and things like that. And so I really kind of learned that I'm sharpest in the morning. And so I adjusted my sleep schedule to a somewhat insane sleep schedule. So essentially, I was waking up at 5 or 5:15, going into the office and studying before work, before everybody got there,
Wow.
so I could get a couple hours in. So I did that for a very, very long time. And then on weekends, I would usually get, bare minimum 3.5 hours to, 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday and a Sunday.
Wow.
But
That's
yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I was pretty much always studying in the morning or, early afternoon on weekends.
quite the commitment right there.
Yeah.
My goodness, and that sort of hits on. So you were a morning person or became a morning person as you drink your coffee to try and energize
Yeah.
yourself.
Became a coffee person too. Wasn't a coffee person before.
I think a lot of us have become coffee people. You know what, GMAT Club, we're over these next few chats, we're gonna try and get a sponsor from a coffee brand like Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, maybe Luckin Coffee. We're gonna get there, guys. It's gonna help you. It's gonna help me a lot, but it's gonna help you guys too. I'm gonna be so much more energetic and fun to be around because we get so much more money. That's gonna be terrific. Man, I sound like Donald Trump. So you've told me now sort of how you studied. You were studying in the mornings. You studied on the weekends. You basically didn't have a life. What was
Yeah.
that? So what was your journey like? Because you're putting in a lot of hours.
Yeah.
When you're putting in those hours, you want to make sure you're seeing progress. And at times, you're probably going to see some walls that you're hitting, and you're gonna feel frustrated. So tell me what that was like. When did you really start to see progress? It was a 3 year journey. So walk me through that. And then when did you hit walls, and how did you start to overcome them?
Yeah. So like I said, I was really starting at what I would say on Quant. I was really starting at zero, I thought. So it was really encouraging when I would learn a subject from scratch and then see, okay, after, a couple of weeks or maybe even just a couple of days, I'm answering more difficult questions with accuracy. So that was really encouraging. But there are lots of different subjects on, Quant. But yeah, so there were lots of different throughout the entire long time frame. There were lots of different, areas of improvement, and then, hitting walls and declining, and it was a long kind of roller coaster journey.
Okay. And when you saw progress, was that progress sort of quick at the beginning, and then much like any learning, or yeah, much like anything, once you start to hit the more aggressive, more difficult materials, because you've adapted to it a little more, would you say your progression in your learning slowed down a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm going to, and probably throughout this whole conversation, segment out quant and verbal because they were very different for me. With
Excellent.
quant,
And that's what I want to hear.
it was very, yes, it was fast and then slow. So as I learned things for the first time, it was, dramatic, exponential improvement. And then eventually I would kind of hit a wall and, spend a lot of time to only get a little bit better in certain subjects. Whereas verbal, I would say was slow and then slow. And it was just kind of a long grind. So we can get to that maybe a little bit later, but that's the short answer.
We will definitely get there. All these skeletons in your closet, much like the skeletons behind me, we're going to get to those. Don't you worry. So I want to dive into your strategy a little bit because I want to touch on the quant and verbal side. You've told me quant you were starting at basically 0, and that means that was sort of an uphill climb for you. I apologize if you already mentioned this. Did you start with quant, or did you start with verbal, being that you're a native speaker?
Yeah, so I started with quant, and I honestly so I honestly did not even look at verbal. I knew there was like sentence correction, I knew reading comprehension, but I didn't like look at it at all until about a year after I initially started studying. And again, like I didn't know that was going to be the case. That's just how long it kind of naturally took me. That certainly wasn't the plan or anything like that. I started with quant.
Okay, so you segmented them out. You started quant, and then you built into.
And my thought process there was that quant was going to be where I was, just based on my background and things like that, going to be where I was, kind of starting from behind relative to the whole pack. So I thought, okay, let's knock that out first, and hopefully verbal can kind of come relatively easy for me. But that wasn't the case either. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. So you started with your weak, and then you went to what you thought was your strongest suit. Tell me about the pacing that you developed with quant initially. A lot of students tend to not know how to handle their strategies appropriately when it comes to their weaker areas, not only in terms of practice testing and practicing questions, but also on the test itself. So how did you sort of develop your strategy around timing and practicing those questions, and then how it translated to your actual test day?
So first and foremost I'll start with the studying side, and then I'll talk about the test taking strategy. So the studying side, I would say this was a weakness. If I could go back and change something over my whole journey, this is something I would change, is I spent too long kind of like mastering subjects and things like that. So I would, for example, if I was studying probability, I would just spend too many days working on it. Even if I, got it pretty well, I was like, I want to master it. But there's no point in mastering it really, because by the time you have to pull everything together, every GMAT subject, you're going to lose that kind of mastery level skill and kind of regress to, the medium. And so that's something I regret doing early on. But then from the test taking side, with timing strategy, I always was pretty slow on both sections and would have to dump questions. And it was just a practice skill that I learned, time management. And I really just learned it through taking CATs, computer adaptive tests, practice tests. And the more I took those, really, I just got better at time management and learning when to dump questions that I don't know, and taking 5 seconds maybe to read the question, and then literally not think about, okay, how am I going to solve this? But do I know how to solve this? Like, how confident am I that I will put pen to paper and end up getting the answer? And if it's not, if I'm not very confident, then I was ready to dump those types of questions. And that helped me a lot.
Awesome. Sounds like you learned.
Yeah, exactly. It was a long process, but eventually got there.
Terrific. So we touch on it a little bit. I want to dive into, and we've not spoken at length about it, but you've touched on it repeatedly. I want to dive into your quant prep.
Sure.
Because this was a 3-year journey, to your point, and you did start with it. So I guess, when you first started out, what was the very first score you got on your CAT when it came to your quant split?
Yeah, so I put off and I don't recommend this at all, but I put off the official practice tests at the beginning, and I didn't take an official one right out of the gate to see where I was, because I was afraid I would get a very low score and that would discourage me. But I did take a GMAT Club quant test, and I got a 27 was my first one.
Oh boy,
a long time ago. Yeah, so it was pretty low. But then eventually, I kind of grinded it out and started hitting the mid to high 40s.
Okay. Now, again, this was over a 3-year period.
Yeah.
You started with quant. How did that studying vary year to year to year? Take us through that process.
So if we want to just kind of simplify it and say year one was just quant. Okay. Quant, like I said, broke it down individual subject by subject. And so I would start and spend, segmented time working on absolute value questions. And I would only do those. And I would get, 20 absolute value questions, work through those. If I didn't understand it, I would learn how to do it. I started with easy questions and then worked my way up. So utilizing GMAT Club, I would do the question filtering and start with sub 600 level questions, and start with official guide questions only. And then once I started getting those really easily, I would move up to 600 and 700 level questions. Once my accuracy improved there, I'd move up to 700 level questions. And I really did that question or subject by subject, for the whole GMAT quant. Does that make sense, by the way?
It does. It absolutely does. You hit on some resources. You talked about OG, which is the official stuff. In my personal opinion, Mike, you might disagree with me on this one. I found that you can use unofficial quant practice questions on our forum. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I would, to an extent. Yeah, to an extent. And I think with quant, especially for me, a lot of it was just learning these rules and the fundamentals. And so during that learning process, I have no issue with using any kind of prep companies to actually learn the skills of these quant subjects. But I do highly recommend when you're kind of getting ready to take your exam, and I learned this the hard way, but when you're really about to take your actual GMAT, leave those questions behind and just do the official questions. It really makes a difference.
That is very good advice. What prep companies did you use, if you used any?
Sure. So I dabbled in several, but I used GMAT Club a lot. So sometimes I would just practice Manhattan questions, for example, through GMAT Club. I did have the Manhattan books as well. I dabbled in a couple other kind of self-guided courses that prep companies have, but ultimately, I use GMAT Club.
Okay. And would you recommend anything in particular? Or is it just GMAT Club? You stick with us. As the shirt says, GMAT Club, shout out. If you stick with us, you're going to succeed if you sort of utilize the resources appropriately.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's nothing wrong with a lot of the other companies out there. Just, a lot of times you got to find what works for you.
Awesome. And speaking of what worked for you, walk me through how you improved, because quant was your weak area. How many questions a day were you doing sort of towards the end of your studies, once you really started to get yourself going and you really understood the concepts? And
Yeah.
conversely, how did you keep track of your progress? Was it an error log? Was it an Excel spreadsheet? Was it as simple as keeping a whiteboard in your room and just writing down certain topics in certain areas and things to remember? So take us through that process.
Yeah, certainly don't have a big enough whiteboard for that, unfortunately.
I don't
So
think anybody does.
I utilized pretty early on, I made a Google spreadsheet. And it's a massive kind of 30 page or 30 sheet type spreadsheet.
Wow.
And yeah, so I would, like I said, so I would segment them out. So I have a whole sheet or page for individual subjects. And so I logged every single question I ever got wrong. And that was simply just copy and pasting the link, writing in the source and the difficulty level. And then at the end of my practice session, I would, see what my accuracy level was. If I got, 15 out of 20 correct or something like that. I don't have a good
Mm-hmm.
number for you on how many questions per day. It really varied because sometimes I would, if I came across a concept I didn't know, I would
Mm-hmm.
do additional research and spend, a lot of time figuring out what I didn't know.
Okay, which is fine. That works. If looking back, at least on the quantitative side, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self 3 years ago,
Yeah.
a lot younger, a lot more handsome because Father Time hadn't done his work yet. The naive human being that he was. If you could go back and obviously tell him to invest in a couple of stocks because the pandemic would hit. Beyond that,
Netflix.
Netflix, Overstock, Peloton.
Yeah.
Um,
Tesla.
oh God. So if you could tell him all the things that you want to tell our users right now, the pitfalls that you went into and the things that you would avoid, at least from a quantitative perspective, what would they be?
Yeah. So honestly, I would tell myself to take away the mindset of mastering every subject. You don't need to. And I didn't believe this at the time, even though I would read it from experts and things like that. Really, you need to be really good at the easy questions and be pretty dang good at the medium questions.
Preach, baby,
And
preach.
yeah, and so you're only as good as your greatest weakness. So you need to make sure you don't have to be super accurate at the 700 level questions because the fact of the matter is I just don't see that many of them on the official GMAT. And so just try and be really well rounded in all the subjects. And if I had done that, I think I would have saved a lot of time for myself by just kind of establishing a really good base as quickly as possible rather than trying to kind of master every subject one at a time.
That is fantastic advice. So I really appreciate that. And remind our users, what quant split did you finish with on your last take?
I got a Q50, which I was not expecting or aiming for. I really wanted between a 47 or a 49. 49 was kind of my goal. When I saw 50 on the screen, I was pretty shocked and obviously excited.
As well you should be. And ladies and gentlemen, that right there is why you take your time and you study, whether it's 3 days, 3 months, or 3 years. Mike went from V27 on our cats.
Q27, yeah.
Or I'm sorry, Q27. We'll get to V in a minute.
Yeah.
It went from Quant 27 to Quant 50, almost doubling the score. So if you follow the process, and by the way, if you're a Philadelphia 76ers fan, which is a basketball team, don't follow their process because it hasn't worked and it won't work. But follow the process, our process, because you're going to get there in the end. But speaking of verbal, so let's go there. Your first cat you ever took, what was the verbal split on that?
Yeah, it was a Veritas cat, and I got a V30.
Which isn't bad. I mean, you're a native speaker,
not
to be expected.
Yeah, not terrible. Certainly kind of hoped it would be a bit higher. But yeah, that was the
I was hoping
point.
it'd be higher too. So tell me what you finished with on your last go of it, the 730, what was that verbal breakdown?
So the verbal on the 730 was actually V38. And then I had taken a GMAT, a couple of weeks beforehand where I hit a 41, but on my
Wow.
final GMAT, I had 38.
Well, you were bound to have some disappointment in this process. How were you able to improve so much in that time frame?
Well, it was a long time frame, so I had a lot of time to improve.
But yeah, so enlighten
Yeah.
us on the materials you use, what you would recommend and wouldn't recommend.
Yeah, so I'll start with what I did, and I don't recommend this, but this is what my journey was. So
Uh-huh.
I eventually with Quant, like I said, started at 27, and then took like some more cats, and ended up getting into the high 40s, 47, 48, and so I was like, wow, that's great. I achieved my goal. And so then I thought, okay, let's just pull together verbal real quick and I'll knock this thing out. Finally, it's been, about a year. Perfect. So I took the exact same approach with verbal that I did with Quant, and I don't recommend it. And so I decided to, take it kind of subject by subject and try and master each thing at a time. So for example, I would filter by sentence correction, only work on pronouns questions and work on all of those. And then the next day, only work on subject verb agreement questions, work on those, etc. And I thought I could kind of segment it out. So that's what I did. And I don't necessarily recommend that.
So then what would you recommend?
So for verbal, I thought especially, there's RC, there's SC, and there's CR, but I recommend diving into the books first, and I did get the Manhattan books.
Okay.
Highly recommend those, particularly the Manhattan sentence correction book. I think it's perfect. I wished I had just started with those and kind of learned the concepts before kind of diving in and practicing. With quant and math, I think you can kind of learn by doing a lot better than you can with the verbal subjects.
So what I'm hearing is that you should practice your fundamentals and not dive into questions on the verbal side, because that's going to end in a very disastrous score.
Yeah, don't just jump straight into questions, which is what I did. I think you can jump straight into questions in quant and kind of learn from mistakes that way. But with verbal, you got to really just learn the concepts and, start with books and things like that.
So you mentioned the books. Did you use anything else? Maybe something written by a user
Yeah,
on our forum?
Sure. Yeah, I read lots of different guides and things like that. So read your guides certainly, as well as others. Watched GMAT Ninja. He's the man. Watched his YouTube videos. Those are super helpful. It's really great to read strategies and these basics, but it's also helpful to see someone do them yourself, and to listen to someone talk through a question. So yeah.
Very sound advice, wise advice. So I appreciate that. And you used my guides and you still got a 38. I'm shocked. That should have been lower. My goodness. But anyway, so moving on to sort of a bit more general. We've covered quant, we've covered verbal. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing is that you need to sort of practice them in tandem. You don't want to separate them out, because when you learn one, you forget the other, and you sort of need to have that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of finish up with verbal, what I ended up doing for the last kind of stretches of my studying, and I do recommend this, is I would do a full kind of, I would create a full set of questions I was going to do. I would do 5 sentence correction questions, 5 critical reasoning questions, and 1 or 2 reading comprehension passages. So I'd sit down at my desk first thing in the morning. I would line up all of these, I was using GMAT Club, so I'd have the tabs open on my browser, and I would work through them timed, no interruptions. And I would mark down my answers on my piece of paper, but I would not check the answers until the very end. So this was the blind review method, which you recommended to me and I recommend to others. And so I would kind of take this, 18, 17 question practice test, if you will, even though I pulled together the questions myself. And then afterwards, I would, maybe take a quick break or something and then come back and look back at question number 1, see, okay, I answered B. The correct answer is C. Why did I miss it? And go through question by question that way. I think that really helped me with timing as well, and just test taking skills. And so, yeah.
Oh, that's music to my ears. Blind review, 5 to 10 questions in CR and CR and SC, and then 1 or 2 RC, and really hammering those out. Oh, music to my ears. That is to a T what I would recommend students do. So kudos to you. With all that, oh, by the way, so when you were studying towards the end of your studies, when you had sort of hammered out a proper study schedule, were you doing quant one day and verbal another day, or were you practicing both of them on the same day?
Yeah, for the most part, they were segmented out, and I would be doing quant one day, verbal another day for the most part. Sometimes I would, do verbal in the morning before work, and then maybe do an hour after work or something of quant all on the same day. But they were pretty much different study sessions.
Which is appropriate. I think that strategy can work, and it has worked. I think another important thing to note is, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are watching and will watch, there is no set path. You can study a 1,000 different ways. It's what works for you. Now, there are certain things that will work for the majority, but again, don't be disappointed if that doesn't click for you. The GMAT can be studied in a variety of ways, and it's all about what's going to work out for you in the end. So take these strategies with a grain of salt, knowing they could work, they might not. In Mike's case, it worked very well, and I'm hearing a lot of great techniques. So do consider trying them. With that said, I want to transition a little more to the general and talk about how you start to avoid traps, tricks, and pitfalls that GMAT likes to throw at you. I know that on verbal specifically, they love to throw out very patterned out traps, and a lot of students like to fall into them. Even in their later studies, I still fall into them every now and again.
Sure.
How did you try and learn to avoid those pitfalls?
Yeah, I don't have a magic bullet answer for this. It just took time.
Shoot.
And it just took time and practice. So particularly, I think about when you mentioned that critical reasoning, those logic traps, right? And so it just took time for me of, falling into that trap time after time again. And then I kind of had an eye for that specific trap, for example.
And I assume you were documenting and writing that stuff out.
Sure.
Correct?
Absolutely. I was
awesome.
Yeah. So every question I ever got wrong, I logged it in my error log and I wrote down what I did, and maybe some other things like watch out for, trap X or whatever. And really just kind of was speaking out loud next to that question as I kind of typed out what I did wrong and what I should do in the future to not make the same mistake.
Awesome. That's what you should do. IR and AWA, two things that students don't focus on. I don't think anybody really focuses on them that long. Did you focus on them? If so, how long did you focus on them? And what were you using, and then how'd you end up doing?
Yeah, I didn't focus on them much. I used, like most people, Chinese Burns AWA guide, and it worked for me. I think I got the is it 6, the perfect score on AWA every time. And then on IR, I ended with I I think a 6, but I had gotten a 7 the time before. And yeah, I didn't use much. I didn't spend much time on either of those two.
Okay. And again, that's to be expected, but you did well enough that schools most likely will not hold that against you, especially if you use Chinese Burns guide. That's one that most students universally agree is the best thing for you. So kudos to you. Did you take the GMAT online or did you do it in person?
Both, for sure.
Well,
Yeah, so
which
I
one
took
was the better score?
my final exam was actually in person. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your final exam was in person, and that's the one you got a 730 on.
Correct.
The last week, and I'll focus on the last day in particular, the actual test day, but take me through
Yeah.
the last week before the test. What were you doing in that week to help prep yourself and help get yourself sort of in the mindset that this is go time, this is it?
Yeah. So a lot of review, and that's what a lot of the last months of, again, this is a long journey. So at the end of the, last couple of months of my study, or even maybe last year, was all review. I wasn't really learning new things. But so let's say 1 week before exam time, I'm going back and looking at, okay, what subjects have I not looked at in a long time? Is it geometry? Should I maybe brush up on some of those rules?
Mm-hmm.
Do I remember the surface area of a cylinder? Maybe not. I should look at that again. And so I was, again, just keeping an eye out of, my goal was, what's my greatest weakness? And let's spend
Mm-hmm.
some time on that. So that's what I was doing.
Okay. Now take me to test day. Or let's
Yeah.
focus on the last 24 hours. So night
Yeah.
before. What
So
did you do the night before?
most people say don't do anything, take a break. And I did that. I took the exam a number of times, and so I did that some. But for me, I maybe because the GMAT studying was just uh, on par for my everyday life. I
Mm-hmm.
found it was helpful to study the day before, and so I was reviewing. It was kind of lightweight studying, I'd say, less doing long sets of questions, but more just kind of reviewing concepts. And I would literally open up that Manhattan SC book and
Mm-hmm.
read through. There were a couple chapters that I read through multiple times, and they were really helpful because I remember getting some really tough sentence correction questions on the GMAT and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about, oh, this was this one kind of obscure rule that I read literally last night. If I had not done that, I would get this question right, but I'm actually going to get it right here.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so I
So
studied the day before.
okay. Now
Call me
the
crazy.
night you're not crazy. I like to do some light lifting as well. At least when it comes to studying the day prior. I've never been a fan of taking the day off. It would just get to me and bother me to no end to know that I could be doing something. And it sounds like
Exactly.
you're the
Yeah.
same. So that test night. So obviously anxiety is probably a little high. Did you watch a movie? Did you watch a show? Did you do anything out of the
Yeah.
ordinary?
So I actually do watch a lot of movies. But
Yes.
I read a book, and that was one thing that I recommend doing that really I think helped my verbal prep. Was I started just reading books like fiction, and I found that it just helped my reading speed. It's obviously really time consuming, and I
Mm-hmm.
put this off a lot, thinking, why should I spend my valuable time reading a book when I could be reading, the Manhattan guides or, you know, uh, reading comprehension passages. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it is one of those things that, although it's not GMAT specific learning, I think
Mm-hmm.
just reading books is helpful. And so that's what I did. So kind of I'd block off like the last 2 or 3 hours before I went to bed the night before GMAT, put my phone away, not look at any screens, and I would just read my book and then go to bed at a good time.
Nice. Which book was it?
I think before I think I was reading the Dune books. I might have been reading the sequel. It's
Interesting
a
choice.
science fiction series.
I'll shout out
There's
to
gonna
that
be a
publisher.
Yeah, there's gonna be a new movie coming out soon. Um, should be pretty big.
Interesting. I'll have to keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. I also read some nonfiction, Thinking Fast and Slow, and I read a book about sleep, which I would recommend as well. It's called Why We Sleep.
Cool. Even better.
Yeah.
By the way, before we move on, I need to know, what movies are you a big buff of? No, are you a comedy guy? Are you an action guy?
Everything. I watch a lot of movies, all different types of genre. Yeah, I've really over the years become quite the movie nerd.
Nothing wrong with that. It'll work to your strength in college.
Last night I watched a 1972 Russian science fiction movie, Solaris. It was insane. It was above my head.
I'm not gonna lie. Of all the things you could have talked about, even that's beyond my movie knowledge. My goodness, was it good?
Supposedly it's one of the greatest films of all time, but my tiny brain could not comprehend it.
You got a 730. If you have a tiny brain, everyone else is in trouble.
It was really deep. Yeah.
My goodness. So I like to recommend students on the night before they take a test, watch your favorite movie. I like to go comedy. So
sure.
Just keep things light, keep things fun. Make sure that you're not stressing yourself out, because if you psych yourself out the night before and you don't sleep, you're not going to do well on the test. So make sure you get your sleep.
For sure. And I completely recommend getting a lot of sleep, exercising the day before. Make sure you do that. Eat well. All of those kind of things to do really make a difference.
Couldn't agree more. So now you wake up the next morning. You know that it's time to go through the test. You go to the test center. Walk me through that process. First and foremost, since you got such a great score, you checked in. Was your anxiety in check? Was everything okay?
Yeah, I was in check. It was my first rodeo, so I think that helped for me. I remember the very first time I took the GMAT in the test center, quite a long time ago. I think there were nerves, and I think that affected my scores. But the more I took it, the more those nerves kind of went away. And I just tried to have that mind, because obviously test anxiety is a big thing, and you'll read kind of everyone has it. But I just tried to take the mindset of, again, I'm in it for the long game. So if I don't get my score today, no worries. I'll take it again next month. And so I kind of had that mindset, and then, in the back of my head, hoping, okay, hopefully this is the last one. But if it's not the end of the world. So that kind of took some pressure off.
Which is the right mindset. Did you ever find yourself short on time in any of the sections?
Sure. Yeah. I think I paced pretty well the last exam, but I definitely did dump some questions due to time, specifically on verbal.
Okay. So I want to hit on that in a minute. But I want to, so I'll circle back to it. Did you know you were seeing tougher questions on the test, given your acumen in each section? And subsequently, how did you deal with that?
This is what I've learned from taking the official GMAT in the test center multiple times with a wide variety of scores in both verbal and quant. I can never accurately predict what score is going to show up at the end. So the whole, I'm getting tough questions, maybe I'm doing well, or, these are easy questions, I'm, doing bad. Just don't even think about it. Just take it one question at a time. I remember specifically this last attempt where I got a Q50 on quant. When I took my break, I thought, I had to guess on a couple of questions that I probably would have gotten right if I'd had a few more minutes, and probably didn't do that well. Kind of told myself, was a little discouraged. And then sure enough, I got a better score than I'd ever gotten. So it's don't try to analyze it at all. Don't spend 1 second doing that, is my recommendation.
Okay, so now that answered another question, which was, why didn't you call yourself Nostradamus on the forum? But not being able to predict those scores at the end, that enlightened me a little bit. Did anything weird happen to you during the exam or during the test day. A funny one I like to mention is the fact that when I took mine in person, I live in the Northeast. Everybody on Earth in this area wears a black coat, and mine
Sure.
happened to be stolen during my test. And stolen's probably a strong term. I think somebody just took mine by accident, and I didn't want to take the fluffy black one that was left because it wasn't mine, and frankly, I couldn't pull it off. But did anything weird happen with you on test day that may have thrown you off a little bit?
Not particularly. There was one moment where I was wearing my mask, and I think it kind of came down below my nose or something, and one of the employees there asked me to adjust it. So that was kind of annoying, but I just tried to brush it off. Overall, pretty good experience. Sounds like you did. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, I want to take us back a little bit. You mentioned you were going through verbal and you probably dropped a couple of questions and you were throwing them overboard. And we talked at the beginning about knowing when to drop a question and knowing when to hold on to it and maybe give your best shot at it.
Yeah.
What was that like for you on test day? And what was sort of the trigger to say, shoot, I don't know this, but I'm going to give it a good shot. And if I hit a minute 30 or 2 minutes, I'm going to guess and move on. What was that like?
So I always wrote down on my whiteboard a couple time markers. So I'd say at question. So for verbal, it's 36 questions. I'd say, okay, at question 19, I need to have about however many minutes left on the clock. At question 24, I need to have about this many minutes on the clock. But I didn't look question by question and make sure, okay, subtract 1 minute and 30 seconds, and that's when I should be done, or anything like that. So a lot of it was by feel. And just a lot of practice. There was one official GMAT attempt I took a while back where I got way behind in quant on a question and just spent way too much time on it, and it ruined my whole test score. So kind of learned the hard way. And so I was mindful of it, but yeah, I don't really have a great answer for you. I just kind of kept an eye on the clock every once in a while and knew if I was running behind and needed to kind of just speed up and things like that. And, especially like on reading comp, you're on that third question or reading comp passage and it's really tough. You're between two. I've kind of learned that even if I spend an extra 2 minutes debating between those two, what's the odds that my accuracy is actually going to change? Is that extra 2 minutes really going to get me the answer? Maybe, but at what cost? And so I was very much willing to take that 50-50 bet on verbal questions, for example, for the sake of time.
So it sounds like that sort of, to your point, that feel, it just comes with practice and understanding, okay, I don't necessarily know this one. I've practiced it a bunch of times. I'm still a little weak. If I can't get it in a decent amount of time, it's time to move on.
Yeah. So in verbal, I knew all of them, but if I had a tough weekend question where I was between two answer choices, I just kind of had to learn that, okay, go with your gut. Maybe you'll get it wrong, but it doesn't matter. You got to move on, because if you don't move on, then you're going to have to dump questions without even looking at them.
Great advice. So I have 2 more questions for you, and then we're going to go to everyone who's been commenting in the comment section.
Great.
I do apologize. We are going to get to those. So my last 2 questions: how did you keep yourself sane in terms of extracurriculars and sort of just having that work-life balance? So you had your work, you had your GMAT, and then you also had to have a social life. And how did you manage all 3?
Yeah, there definitely were sacrifices, but it was also really important to spend time with friends and family as much as I could. Certainly very important to exercise and be physically healthy. So eating good food, healthy food, and exercising regularly was of the highest importance. And then I did also learn that, if I didn't socialize, if I didn't, call and check in with my buddies, that would affect my, focus or attention in a study session and things like that. So it is really important to be well-rounded, but it's also, tough. The best thing you can do is get rid of the, bad distractions like scrolling through Twitter or something. and just try and optimize your time. If you're going to sit down and watch a movie and have fun, then sit down and watch a movie, but don't necessarily just try not to waste your time, I guess.
Oh yeah, so what do you lift, bro?
Nothing compared to you. I haven't maxed or anything like that in a long time.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
That's okay though. By the way, I just realized I kept getting like weird audio feedback and little scratching. I just realized this thing's been like scratching against my shirt the whole time. So now I'm upset. We just did 50 minutes and there's like a little scratching throughout this.
No, I couldn't hear it much. I think we're good.
Oh, I'm so upset because last time that happened too, I was like, it's not going to happen again. And of course it did. So anyways, so what are your future plans like? I know you're starting your applications. What schools does Mike want to go to? And what's the end goal here?
Yeah, I think that I kind of took a break after I finished the GMAT, right? Well deserved. So
Very
haven't
well
spent
deserved.
too much time. Thank you. I haven't spent too much time researching schools and things like that. Kind of have an idea of what the short list of schools will be, but I'll just have to do some more research. And ultimately, I think after B school, I'll probably want to stay in tech in some capacity, but we'll see where that goes.
Awesome. Sounds like a great plan. So now to all you patient people who've been waiting in the chat, I am now going to pull up all your lovely questions. How did we get on Doom? And John
Doom?
Wick. Oh, yeah, because you mentioned Dune, and everybody was talking about Doom. Oh, good job, guys, for keeping that on topic. So let's see here. So how long did you prep for verbal? I think we discussed that, correct?
Yeah, I think if we wanted to kind of simplify what my timeline was, I think it'd be pretty fair to say could split up into 3 years and kind of 3 stages. This isn't necessarily 100% accurate, but about a year doing just quant, about a year of doing just verbal, and then a year of pulling them together. Again, I don't recommend doing that. I went the long route. I do recommend BB's guide of how to study the GMAT. But for me, this is the way it went.
Excellent. So Sanjay, thank you. Hello to you, because I did say I'd give everybody a shout out. Christiana, hello to you as well. Hope you are having a wonderful weekend. Sankar, I probably mispronounced that. Sanskar, I apologize. Asked, how did you manage your exam anxiety? And it sounds like you didn't really have any, which is a good thing.
I did, especially the first time, but I just settled in and practicing lots of practice tests. I think it's helpful, and especially if you just see the same interface. Kind of the more you do things, the less nervous or anxious you'll get. That's my answer.
I love it. We have another question of what score did you start out? We sort of touched on that, but how many attempts in total did you do? I know you took at least 2 that I know of. Did you take any others?
Of the official GMAT?
Yes.
I took it a total of 6 times. One time being online.
Okay.
And I was very much prepared to do all 8 attempts, or 9, I guess, since we have the online GMAT now.
Hey, there's my headline: 3 years, but also 6 attempts. That shows your level of commitment and drive to continue to push through that. And know that this is your end goal and this is what you want. That is incredible. If you don't mind me asking, how did you keep motivated throughout that process?
Yeah, there were times where I was motivated throughout this whole thing, and there were times that I was not motivated. But ultimately, I didn't let my actions follow my motivation. And so whether I was motivated to get up and study or not didn't matter. I was going to get up and study. And so that's kind of my answer, I guess.
No, it's terrific. That drive, that determination, there's your story. There's what colleges
And
should probably hear about.
yeah, and once I put in enough time, a certain amount of time, right? Like even after I was like, okay, I've spent a year studying, there's no going back now, right? Because if I just quit, then I just wasted a year of my life. And so the stakes were pretty high, and so I knew that no matter what happened, no matter how demotivated I would be after missing the mark on several attempts and things like that, doesn't matter. So I just kept grinding.
Kudos to you. You deserve 1,000
Thanks.
kudos for that. Next question is, was there a key concept in math? And again, you've said don't try and master math. Or I'm sorry, quant specific sections. You don't have to be a genius in all of them.
Yeah.
But was there one in particular section that just, wait, am I reading that right? Was there a key concept in math that just made everything click on the quant side of it?
No.
Or was it just wider scale of things, general?
No, the quant is really, it is a wider scale of things. There's no shortcuts. There's no rules you can apply to every type of question. I just had to grind it out.
Which is wise. Okay, interesting question. Did you read the last 3 sections of the Manhattan Sense Correction book? I assume you read all of them in great detail.
No, I don't think I did. I can't remember all of the chapters, but I know there were a couple at the end of the book that were like advanced rules and things like that. And I didn't spend much time on those. I may have read them my initial read through. But ultimately, I was reading the chapter 3, chapter 4, parallelism, modifiers, and rereading those over and over again. And it really helped. And I was scoring in the, again, I didn't on my final attempt, but I was scoring in the 40s in verbal.
And those would be the ones you'd focus on the most.
100%.
That is fantastic to know. As somebody who read the entire book cover to cover, I can say I probably did that wrong. So good for me. Did you, again, this is a bit more personal, you don't have to answer that if you don't want
I didn't.
to.
No
health issues because you worked out, because you ate appropriately.
Yeah, I worked out. I ate nutritious food, and I got a lot of sleep, so I didn't have health issues. I made that a priority.
Exactly.
Stay healthy. You can sacrifice other things other than your eating habits or things like that. Sacrifice other things that you may think are fun or something like that, but don't sacrifice those things for the GMAT.
Couldn't agree more. Are you planning on highlighting this journey, and I guess I talked about that a little bit, as part of your MBA application?
I don't know. I think it can be seen as good or bad. On the bad side, it took me maybe 10 times as long as the normal person who gets a 730 to get here. But on the good side, I did have, I showed a lot of perseverance, I think, and determination. So I could highlight that, but I haven't decided what, kind of my story is yet for applications.
Leave that to the experts. Let's see here. Amazing job, Mike. How many practice exams did you take? Do you know off the top of your head?
I do. For full exams, so not counting the GMAT Club Quant Cats, but for like Veritas and Manhattan and the officials, I took 20.
Wow. Did you take all 6 of the officials?
Yes, I took all 6 of the officials, and I retook number 1 and number 2. And I put these off for a long time, and that would be one thing I would change, is I think it is important to fairly regularly take full practice exams.
And to that point, your final week or your final 2 weeks, did you do a couple more practice exams than you had previously taken in the past, or was it still pretty consistent?
Yeah, I would usually
I'm sorry. How many times? Yep, go ahead.
I would usually take a practice exam, the weekend before or maybe like a full 7 or 10 or 14 days before my official GMAT.
Okay, and in general, how spaced out were those cats?
Looking at my fancy log here, maybe a month or two, or it just kind of varied.
Okay, so it varied.
You can look on
works.
my post. I have the dates, and the exact dates of when I took all of my cats. So they're all on GMAT Club if you want to see.
Awesome. Did you find the online version to be more difficult compared to the offline one?
Well, I got a lower score, so yes, but no. I remember my online exam. I thought I killed it. I thought I got a good score, and I didn't. So again, my point is, it's impossible to predict how well you did. Whenever I thought I killed it, I didn't. Whenever I thought I did not well in a section, I ended up doing well. So you can't predict it. And no, I don't think the online version is. I think it's the same questions.
Okay, and it looks like this is, I think, will be our last question, which is, given your study was such a long time, how often did you go back to your error log and your study log?
Yeah, so I used my study log every day to log what I was doing, and I would, review and I didn't do this enough, but the
Mm-hmm.
idea is you should review what's the mistake I made 2 days ago on, the set of 5 critical reasoning questions, and review those mistakes before you, start another set of questions.
Awesome. It's what we probably want to hear. I want to give a quick shout out to Gagan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm an arrogant American who doesn't know how to say these things very well. But you, according to this person, you have motivated them quite a bit, and to me, that warms my heart because that's what these are all about. It's to help give you guys motivation. It's to help show you that it is possible, no matter where you start from, no matter where you think you've ended in your studies, you can always hit that 730, 740 mark. Mike, is there any lasting comments or questions that either didn't get answered or that you want to say that we didn't cover?
On one kind of back to the specifics on verbal, I highly recommend only using official guide questions, and you can use LSAT questions.
Yes.
I actually use the LSAT reading comprehension questions a lot on the last kind of stage of my studying, mostly because I'd kind of seen all of the official guide RCs before. But I did find that doing those it was kind of like, putting extra weight on the barbell, if you will. And then when you actually take your practice exams or the official GMAT, those RC passages seem so much easier. And so that was something for me that I think helped and maybe increased my reading speed as well, because the LSAT passages are more dense and longer, and things like that, and just more difficult. So I found that helpful for me.
And I want to echo that sentiment. LSAT CR and LSAT RC are incredibly difficult. They are meant to be more difficult, but they, to Mike's point, will make you feel like you're playing around with 600 level questions and sub 600 level questions throughout your entire GMAT. They just make everything seem a whole lot easier. I talk about that in my CR and RC guides. Mike recommends them, and I do as well. I hope that they help all of you guys a lot. And for those who message me and say, can you help me? Read my guides, please. With that said, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. It is an absolute pleasure having you, especially an ex-moderator who has helped give back to the community. For really quick PSA, for those of you who are still around after an hour and 10, kudos to you. My goodness. I'd be throwing myself off a bridge if I had to listen to me for an hour and 10 minutes. We have done the October debrief. This one's in the books. We are now going to start looking for people for the November and December debriefs. So if you are interested, our search is going to begin today or tomorrow. Please message me on GMAT Club, message me your debrief, or tag me in your debrief and say, I'd love to be a part of a YouTube debrief, and we can see what we can do for you so that way you can get in front of the community and tell your story. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining me, and everyone else have a fantastic weekend.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks.